A pleasant evening to everyone. We will continue with our series entitled When God Asks Questions. And tonight we will be basing our meditation from the book of Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 to 16. Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 to 16. I will read from the New American Standard Bible. The word of the Lord says, "Now the man had relations with his wife Eve. And she conceived and gave birth to Cain and said, 'I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord.' Again she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of the flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering, but for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became angry, very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it.' Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is Abel, your brother?' And he said, 'I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?' He said, 'What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth.' Cain said to the Lord, 'My punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And whoever finds me will kill me.' So the Lord said to him, 'Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold.' And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain so that no one finding him would slay him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden." May the good Lord bless the reading of His word. I just celebrated my 40th just a few days ago. And my son came to me and said, "Daddy, I wanted to give you a precious gift, but I don't have money to buy anything. And so I just made up my mind of creating something." So with the help of his aunt and tito, he created something on a paper. He actually printed something on a paper, and he went to me bringing that paper bag, and so excited, he handed it to me. And he said, "I have something so nice inside for you." I got so excited about it also, so I got the bag, and then I saw a bond paper rolled. And he said, "Inside that, there is something that is printed that looks like you." And I got even more excited. So I opened it. Lo and behold, I saw on that paper printed a movie character. Who would not be amazed? Your child looks at you like someone who can be seen in a movie, right? You would be excited. You would love that. But that movie character that he printed was not a human being. He's a movie character that is animated. And it looks like this. And it says there, "Happy birthday, Daddy Baymax." I just laugh at it. I look at him, and I was still happy because I just saw him how happy and excited he was when he handed it to me. And I let him feel how much I appreciated what he gave. Because I cannot imagine how he would feel if what he prepared for me, if I would reject it. Maybe he's gonna carry it all throughout his life, that one time I gave something to my dad and he just got it, crumpled it, and threw it to the garbage bin because he didn't like it. But I made sure, because I like it also, I laughed at it. I made sure that he was appreciated. I made it sure that he would feel that what he gave me was fully accepted. You know, I cannot really imagine what a child would feel if what he gives to his parents will be rejected. That's why parents, mom and dads, if your children would give something to you, just think about it and appreciate it. Because, you know, they may have poured out everything they have just to give you that thing. And sometimes we don't appreciate what our children would give to us, but let's be more intentional on this matter, that when they give us something, let's appreciate it. You know, one time, there are two Bible characters that were close with each other because they were siblings. Cain and Abel. Abel gave his offering to the Lord and God was pleased and accepted it. The text tells us that God gave some regard, or God regarded so well the offerings of Abel. And yet on the other hand, Cain's offering was not really appreciated. It did not please God. In other words, the offerings of Cain were rejected by God. I cannot understand. I do not know what he felt that time. It's so upsetting. If you have someone who came to you and gave you something and you reject it, that exactly was the experience of Cain. It was a painful experience, I believe. It was a disappointing experience, I believe. I don't understand why God really rejected him. If you just look swiftly at the text, you wouldn't understand it right away. But if you take time to understand the words that were penned down by the author, there are hints that would give us the reasons why God rejected his offerings. That is why you read further when you look at let's look at the Bible. Look at verse 5. Verse 5. But for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. That's a painful one. God had no regard for Cain and his offering. Take note that the description was separated here about the offering and about the person who gave the offering. It's clear here that God had no regard not only for the offering, but also for the one who gave the offering. That's clear in verse 5. And it says there, and the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain, there was no regard from God for him and his offering. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why are you angry? Well, the Bible doesn't say that Cain responded to the Lord saying, don't you know why I'm angry? It's because of you. But Cain didn't say those words, and the Lord said something like this, and why has your face or countenance fallen? If you do well, now take note of what he said in verse 7. God said this line, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? If you do not do well, if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you. So God said to Cain, in response to the display of his anger, God told him, there's something that you did that wasn't right. In other words, he said, if you do well, with what? With the offering. In other words, there was something wrong with the offering of Abel. Let's go back to verses 3 and 4. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Take note of this statement. Cain brought an offering to the Lord out of the fruit of the ground. Okay? Let's proceed. Abel, verse 4, on his part also brought of the firstlings. Or in other term, it uses the term firstborns, okay? Firstlings and the fat portion. The offering of Abel was described in a very generic way. He brought offerings to God as from the fruit of the ground. Well, that was natural because he was a tiller of the ground. He was an agriculturist in our own term today. He's good at that. He plants, he can make it grow, and then he can harvest out of it. Naturally, if that's the work of your hand, your offering should come from that. And Cain gave to the Lord an offering from the fruits of the ground. That's clear. Now let's go to Abel. Abel's offering was described like this. His offering was the firstlings, the firstborn. Abel was someone who raised animals. So naturally, his offerings would come from the animals. But very specific description was given about it. The text tells us that he offered to the Lord among the firstlings. He chose the firstlings. What's the firstlings? The firstborn of the animals that he was taking care of. Added to that, he gave to God the fat portion. If I'm going to translate those descriptions about the offerings of Abel, he simply gave to God the best of his offerings. He chose among all those herds that he had, he picked the best out of it and segregated them so that he could offer them to God. Now, I know of a person, he's an owner of a coffee shop. I visited his shop just this past week. And while I was there, he saw me and he recognized me. So he went there and joined me while I was sipping the coffee. And he said, "Pastor, I've been longing to talk to you about coffee." Because he said, "I am so passionate about it." And he said, "You know what? I go to Bukidnon just to buy coffee. I go there myself. And because coffee are planted on high elevated areas, he goes there himself." He said the travel wouldn't be, it's not easy, but it's really relieving to see coffee farmers, coffee growers there on the mountain. And he says, when I got there, they offer me a variety of coffee. But I always go to something that I would see as best. So he goes there, but he doesn't say to the coffee growers, "Give me one sack of coffee, I'll pay it and I'll go home." He doesn't do it that way. You know what he does? He goes where the coffee beans are, the harvested coffee beans. And among all those seeds in front of him, hundreds and thousands of seeds in front of him, he picks one after the other, those which he thought were the best out of them. One after the other, until he fills his container. That's crazy. If you want coffee, you just get a bag of it and then pay for it and then go home. But this guy who owns that coffee shop, he said, "I pick it one bean after the other and set them aside. And the way I perceive them as the best, I get it from them and then I segregate it. When my container is filled, I pay for it. I come back to Zamboanga and roast it myself." No wonder the coffee was really good. And that's exactly what Abel did. Of all the animals that he was raising, he looked at them, he segregated the firstborn. These are special individuals for the Lord. I'm going to separate them for God. And then out of those animals that he slaughtered, he separated the fat portions. Because to him, my God deserves nothing more but my best. And that's what he gave to the Lord. And that is why if you contrast the offering of Abel from the offering of Cain, the standard of Cain's offering does not reach the level of standard that God wanted as exemplified in the offerings of Abel. So if you look at the text and don't dive deep into it, you wouldn't notice the difference of their offerings. You'll just see that both of them offered something to God, and God accepted the other's offering and rejected the other's offering. But that's not the case. There was something wrong with the offering. God did not give any regard for Cain and his offering, because in the first place, Cain did not give a high regard to the God to whom he's going to give his offerings. I'll repeat that line. God did not have any regard for Cain and his offering, because in the first place, Cain did not give a high regard to God to whom his offering is going to be given. There is a problem not only with the offerings of Cain, but that goes back to the heart problem. The way he chose his choices of his offering, something wrong with it. Because if he wanted to equal the level of the offering, the quality of the offering of his brother Abel, his offering must be the first fruit of his produce. His brother offered the firstlings. He should have offered the first fruits. But he did not do it. Maybe he just went there, got some, and then went to offer it to the Lord. But Abel gave to God what he thought was best, because God deserves nothing more but the best from him. Something was wrong with how he chose his offering. And this is rooted from the previous chapter, because if you flip your Bible in the previous in the previous pages, it records, chapter 3 of Genesis records the fall of man. And the fall of man would tell us that one day Eve and Adam ate the fruit of the tree that was forbidden from them to eat. And then when they ate the fruit of the tree, it gave them the knowledge about good and evil. That is why if you look at chapter 3 verse 22, there was a character's comment. God himself said those words. He said, they became like us. The word they, that pronoun pertained to Adam and Eve. They became like us. God was saying the statement, meaning to say, Adam and Eve became like God. In what way? Because by the time they ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they unlocked a new skill. What was that? They were able now to identify the good from evil and evil from what is good. Because in the earlier part of the story in the Garden of Eden, they were dependent on the decisions of God. When God tells them you can eat this, they will eat it. When God tells them do not eat this, they won't eat it. When God tells them it's time for you to sleep, they will rest. When God tells them it's time for you to cultivate and move around, they'll do that. They were dependent on the decisions of God. But right now, when they ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had now the capacity to identify which is evil from what is good and what is good from which is evil. And because of that, they were now making decisions for themselves, independent from the God who created them. They were given now the freedom of choice. And when you look at chapter 4, it was an illustration of that choice that they made in the earlier part of the section. Abel made the right choice. Cain failed to choose the right option in terms of his offerings. And thus, if you look at it, he made other choices that were so wrong. That is why after this offering issue, God told him, Cain, there is something wrong with your offering. If you do it well, your countenance will be lifted up. But if you don't do it well, there is sin crouching in your heart. And you know what he did? Instead of telling the Lord, Lord, I'm so sorry about what I did, he made another choice. He acted on something. What did he do? He killed his brother. His choice of action was so wrong. His choice of offering was wrong. Now his choice of action was wrong also. He killed his brother. And here comes the question that we are considering within this series. God went to him and asked him, where is Abel, your brother? Because in that question, it gives a sense of accountability. You are accountable to your brother. You are accountable to me about your brother. Where is Abel, your brother? It denotes the relationship of this Cain with Abel. And yet out of that relationship, he did not regard his brother's life so much. Why did I say that? Because in the first place, he did not regard his God highly. The problem within the vertical relationship that we have would affect our horizontal relationship with the people around us. And that's a reality that happens until today. So Cain had a problem with his relationship with God, and it was manifested on how he related with his brother. He did not have a high regard for his God. He did not have a high regard for the life of his brother. That was the problem. He made another wrong choice. He killed him. And so God went to him, where is Abel, your brother? And out of that question of God, you know what happened? He gave God a wrong choice of words. Because out of that question, where is your brother? Where is Abel, your brother? You know what he said? He said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Seriously. Seriously, Cain, you have the guts to tell God those words. You know, your regard for a person would dictate the kind of words you use when you communicate with him. I'll repeat that line. Your regard for the person that you are talking with would tell a lot, would dictate, in fact, the kind of words that you use when you communicate with him. So if I look at the person highly, I will be very careful on how I choose the words that I say. But if I look down on that person that I'm talking to, I may be very careless and tactless with the words that I use. You see, how I regard the person that I'm conversing with dictates or tells a lot about the kind of words that I would say. And Cain just used sarcasm before God. It only affirms that he did not have a high regard for his God. And added to that, God told him, because you did this, what have you done? The blood of your brother now is welcomed by the ground that you till. And because of that, if you plant, if you cultivate the ground wouldn't cooperate anymore. Why? Because the blood of your brother is there, it's crying out to me. And the irony of the matter is that the ground that Cain used to cultivate for his good, for his benefit, is now becoming a testifier against him because of the blood of his brother that was shed on that ground. And so God told him, Cain, you will be cursed from the face of this ground. You will be a wanderer, because whenever you plant on this ground, the ground will not yield its strength for you anymore. It's not going to give you the produce that you had before, because you are cursed from what you have because of what you have done. And so Cain responded to the Lord saying, Lord, this is too heavy. It's too much. Your punishment is too much. It was a combination of a complaint and a self-pity. It was like saying, "Wad ka maluoy nako, Lord? Luoy kay ko aning imong punishment to, grabe pud ni ay." He complained, and he had like that self-pity thing. Instead of responding to the Lord and saying to him, Lord, I repent from what I have done. I admit I committed a mistake, and I am repenting right now. Please forgive me. Have mercy on me. He did not say those words. He instead responded to the Lord, telling him, grabe pud ka. Your punishment is too heavy. And you know what happens to me, Lord? If I'm going to move around, if I wander, those bandits around will see me and they'll kill me. He responded to God with that questioning, with that anger still, and with a feeling of self-pity. So if you look at all of these details that I have given to you, they only affirm what was in the heart of Cain. God did not give any regard for Cain and his offering because Cain did not give a high regard for God. In terms of his choice of the offering, in terms of his choice of action, in terms of his choice of words when he talked to him, in terms of his choice of response before the God who called him. Well, it's so easy to condemn this man, right? It's something like you don't have to take a minute for you to think to condemn him. It's so easy. Why? Because we see the whole story. We know what he did. We can contrast what Abel did from what Cain did. So it's so easy to say this guy is a bad person. Walang utang na loob kay God. Ang sama ni Cain. That can be a possible judgment that would come from the readers today. But when we read the Bible story, it invites us to become a part of it. That in many ways, it invites us to identify ourselves with a character. And many times, we may be able to identify ourselves with Abel, on which we give our best to God. But are there not moments also in the past that we made the wrong choice in terms of our offerings to Him? Are there moments in the past that we could see and recall that there were wrong choice of words that we used? Are there moments in the past that we could see and recall today that there were wrong choice of actions that we displayed? Wrong choice of response that we showed to others? Because the way we identify the offering, the way we identify the speech that we utter, the way that we identify the actions that we project, and the response that we give to the people around us, they tell a lot about the God that we worship. And I'm hoping that we will have a desire in our hearts like what Abel desired to give to God. Because at the end of the day, God deserves nothing more but our best. Giving God our best is the best thing that we can do. I'll repeat. Giving God our best is the best thing that we can do. In every aspect of life, not only when we come here and present something to the Lord, but when we go out there and use the words that God has gifted us with, when we use the actions that we can project, the decisions we make by showing the response that we have, all of those things would show how we regard the God who called us. And I am praying that in every aspect of our being, we would have that desire, that our hearts would beat, pug, 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 giving God our desire, the best, nothing more but the best from us. So I am praying and challenging every one of us, including myself, in everything that we do, let's give our best to God, because God deserves nothing more but the best from us. And the best thing that we can do is to give Him our very best. You know, at the end of this conversation, Cain continued to show his stubbornness. Cain continued to show his hard-headedness. And out of the consequence that God gave him, he complained about it. Because this is a reality. God has given us the freedom of choice, but we are never given the prerogative to determine the outcome of our choices. I'll repeat that line. As mentioned by one of the apologists, Christian apologists, God has given us the freedom of choice, but we do not have the prerogative to identify the consequence for each of the choice we make. We should be responsible for every consequence of the choices that we have made. And yet Cain did not display that before God. However, if you look at the character of God in verses 15 and 16, despite the stubbornness of Cain, you know what God told him? Because Cain was so concerned that he will be killed when he wanders. God told him, Cain, I'm going to put a mark on you, a sign, that when the people around would see that mark, they will never touch you because they will be able to identify that mark as coming from God. God responded in grace. God responded by continually protecting him. And this is a very ironic matter if you look at the narrative. Because when God asked him, where is Abel, your brother? He said, am I my brother's keeper? And yet out of that stubborn response of Cain, God told him, yes. It's a rhetorical question actually that Cain was expecting to answer. No, I am not my brother's keeper. But in the mind of God, yes, you are your brother's keeper. But despite the fact that you failed to keep him, I am willing to keep you and protect your life against any person around. That's an exemplification of grace given to Cain. You know what? There is nothing more that we could give that would please God but our best. With faith, we give it to him because that's what he deserves. But whenever we fail to do it because of our stubbornness as well, God often responds in grace to the sinners, those hard-headed people like you and me. That makes us more appreciate who God is and how he interacts with his stubborn people. So again, let's continue to give God our best because that's the best thing that we can do. But if we fail, always remember, never run away from him because he's so gracious that he responds in grace despite our disgraceful acts. I'll repeat, never run away from God. Because if we fail to give him our best, he responds in grace despite our disgraceful acts. And with that, I am leaving it to you, that you make the right choice of giving God your best and coming back to him despite our mistakes. God bless you all and good evening.